Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Dream Big Today. My name is Debbie, and this is Tuesday, July the 9th. And so, we're going to be talking about storms, the storms of life, and in the physical storm that Paul was in his journey. That will be in Acts. And so, I'm so glad that you joined this morning. Put your prayer requests and your praise reports in the chat box. Elizabeth is taking her mom to an appointment this morning, so I get to be with you again today, and that's so exciting for me because that means I get to dig into the Word even more because I get to come and talk to you. And so, 1 Chronicles 7 through 8, those two chapters is what we're going to start out with today. You know, sometimes it's kind of hard to dig in to see what could I possibly get out of a whole bunch of names of warriors and all of the descendants and this clan and that clan and just what in the world can I take from this? What's my takeaway? Well, for me today, my takeaway is that these are still just regular people living life together. And as I went through what's common in all of this, so I get my highlighter out and I go through looking to see what is the same that flows through. And what I ended up with my highlights was they were mighty warriors. It wasn't that they were just old enough to fight or that they were, they could pick up a club and kill a rabbit. I mean, these were mighty warriors. So that's telling me that they were trained, they were experienced, they took care of business when they needed to. The names of all of these people isn't really anything that I want to try to pronounce in my Okie slang today. My accent just is not going to do it justice. But whenever in 7:2, towards the end of it, it says, at the time of King David, there were the total number of mighty warriors listed in the records of these clans was over 22,000. And so I feel like that whenever you see that it was David's army, that he might have had something to do with the training, the reason that they were mighty. I don't know. I'm just guessing. But then you see these little tidbits all sprinkled through this. And look at verse 4, talking about this group. All of them had many wives and many sons. So that tells us that polygamy was running strong through this time. I guess they didn't do what God wanted them to do. I mean, it was still he only intended to have one man and one woman in a marriage situation. I say situation, that probably in a marriage covenant situation sounds like a problem, but it was only supposed to be that. And they did things they were not supposed to do. And then verse 5 again talks about mighty warriors. The total of mighty warriors, I just have, now that I picked that out, it's just all the way down through the page of all of these clans that had mighty warriors. Then we get down to verse 13, and it says, here's somebody else that they were descendants of Jacob's concubine. So the wives and the concubines, they just kept bringing them in so they could form relationships with other clans by means of bringing another woman into the clan. I'm thinking, I'm not really sure that how that was made sense, but it did at that time. so it continues on with that. And then how would you like for your story to be when they're talking about all of these mighty warriors, and right in the smack dab middle of it, you see in verse 20, these descendants, and it gives their names, and then it says, these two were killed trying to steal livestock from the local farmers near Gath. Now, so here's a bunch of mighty warriors, and now then we're going to throw in there that they've got thieves. And that's lasting forever, forever. People will read that. Oh, man. Lord, when somebody writes my history, I just pray that there's not anything stupid like that in mine. Now, I know there's a lot of stupid stuff, but oh my goodness, can you just imagine whoever these guys are will always be remembered that they were killed trying to steal livestock, of all things. And then names make a difference. Look at verse 23. Here's a lady that gave birth to a son and named him Beriah. Well, so what does Beriah mean? It's because of tragedy. If you look over to the little footnotes, it says Beriah sounds like a Hebrew term meaning tragedy or misfortune. So you start out your life knowing that it was a tragedy, which she's probably talking about losing the other sons, but now you hear this kid is stuck with I'm the mistake, I'm a misfortune, I am this for the rest of my life. Oh my word. And then end of verse 27, we see Joshua's name pop up. Circle that, because this is somebody familiar. Because he's the great Israel leader that led the people into the promised land. We get into some familiar names. And then over to verse 40, it talks about these descendants of Asher. Now, I highlighted that because I think this is great too. All of these were select men, mighty warriors, and outstanding leaders. So they looked for these type of qualifications, these knowledge, skills, and abilities in the people that they wanted to be in charge of the clans, of the communities, of the area. They didn't just throw somebody out there that was kind of lazy. It doesn't talk about that. And it certainly, if they were stealing and thieves, they didn't throw them up there to lead anybody. But they were select, mighty, and outstanding. In verse 8 of chapter 8, there it talks about somebody divorcing his wives, plural. He divorced his wives, more polygamy. And then when we jump on over into verse 33 of chapter 8, we see another familiar name pop up. It's Saul, Israel's first king, when everybody thought just absolutely had to have a king. And Saul was the one. He was tall, dark, and handsome. He was smart, although he wasn't all of that in a bag of chips, as we read in the story. His son is mentioned, who was a friend of David. And then towards the end of it, in verse 40, it gets on down again to Ulam's sons were all mighty warriors and expert teachers, or expert archers. Oh, I wasn't reading I highlighted too much in my notes. So once again, they are emphasizing the abilities. And I think that is something that we should think about. God's given you skills and abilities. You have talents. And those talents will be expanded on whenever you're using them for God. They will get better and better. And you will be remembered for being that expert, that wise person, that outstanding leader whenever you do and walk the walk that God has for you. He's for you. So now let's jump into Acts. Acts is a story of storms. And here poor Paul, has been through a mess but he's not done yet. And so we can kind of also look at this in the spiritual sense about the storms of life. We have warnings. Are we listening to those warnings? Are we watching for the signs? Are we praying and preparing ourselves for this day? Verse 27, and this is just 1 through 20. It says, when the time came. Now I'm going to be using my little Bible again. Is it easier for me to hold up? We, Luke, Paul, and the companions. So see, Luke is the one that wrote Acts, so it makes sense that he's here documenting everything. And let me tell you, he has documented details like none other in this. He talks about the prisoners. They're placed in the custody of the Roman officer. And where they're going, what they're doing, and so I'm not going to get into that, but I want to drop on down on verse 3. The next day, we docked at Sidon, or however you say that. Julius was very kind to Paul and let him go ashore to visit. So Julius was assigned to Paul and had to remain close to him at all times. So whenever you're with somebody, whether you like them or not, you're going to develop some kind of relationship with them. You'll begin to understand their thought processes, and just get used to them. It changes things. And that's like for us, whenever we have somebody new around us, get to know them, because everybody's got a story. And once you understand their story, you're going to understand their heart. You'll know more about them and you'll be able to relate to them. Well, in this case, this was beneficial for Paul because he had a little freedom, because he knew, and they knew each other. They'd been together. And what a great thing for Julius to be with Paul all the time and just hear him talk about Jesus. So in verse 4, it says, putting out to sea from there, we encountered strong headwinds that made it difficult to keep the ship on course. This is where we start talking about those storms of life. The strong headwinds can represent the strong opposition that we have whenever we're trying to spread the gospel, if you look at it in the spiritual sense. And it talks about their sailing and where they go. Verse 7 says, we had several days of slow sailing, and after great difficulty, we finally neared Cnidus. But the wind was against us. Now in 2 Corinthians 11:25, Paul states that 3 times he was shipwrecked. So this, what we're getting ready to read about, will be for number 4, shipwreck. So Paul knows what this is all like. He understands what's going to happen. It says, we struggled along the coast with great difficulty and finally arrived at Fair Havens. Now this was actually a place for safety, near the town of Lasea. We had lost time. The weather was becoming dangerous for sea travel because it was so late in the fall. Now, what he's talking about is, if you look at the little asterisk there to see what that's talking about, it in the Greek, because the fast was already gone. This fast was associated with the Day of Atonement. So that puts it down to that time of year where there's a lot of storms, a lot of bad weather, that you don't get out on the water during this time. So Paul is getting ready to speak to them as an experienced traveler on the Mediterranean, because he's already traveled some 3,500 miles by sea. Paul knows. Plus, he has God with him. And because God is with him, then these people will make it. They just don't know. When God has us on a mission, whoever's with Paul's going to be fine, because God's taken him to the next spot. Now, it might not be easy, and people may give up, but whenever we continue pushing forward, we're going to get through that because God is with us. Okay, so then it goes on to say, we lost a lot of time. The weather was becoming dangerous for sea travel because it was late in the fall, and Paul spoke to the ship's officers about it. Men, he said, I believe there's trouble ahead. If we go on, shipwreck, loss of cargo, and danger of our lives as well. But the officer in charge of the prisoners listened more to the ship's captain and the owner than to Paul. And most of the crew. So if you read in another version, the ESV says the majority decided. So here's where I want to land for us today. Stop listening to the majority. When we see this story, and we don't get to finish it for today. Now, Elizabeth will tomorrow, and I may have to drop in part of it from tomorrow's reading. She won't mind. But sometimes we get caught up in group think, and that's like today. If everybody is doing the same thing, does that mean it's okay? Does that mean it's legal, it's safe, or moral? No. Sometimes we just go along to conform with the majority because we don't want to stand up and say, hey, that's not right. The desire to be right is replaced with the need to be liked. So we have to prepare to be disliked when we stand up for God. Paul stood up and told them, this isn't going to work good. This isn't going to be right. But he's a prisoner. He's the only one that said something. Here's all of these people that they wanted to push forward. They wanted to go on. They wanted to continue going. Galatians 1:10, part of that says, am I seeking the approval of God or man? And since Fair Havens was an exposed harbor, a poor place to spend the winter, most of the crew wanted to go on to Phoenix, farther up the coast of Crete, and spend the winter there. And then verse 13, when a light wind began blowing, the sailors thought they could make it. See, there's just a little bit of relief. There was they thought it was a terrible thought, because they didn't listen to the expert. Verse 14, the weather changed abruptly. A wind of typhoon strength, called a nor'easter, burst across the island and blew us out to sea, and they could not turn the ship. Have you ever felt like that you were just coasting along? You didn't make any waves. You just went with the crowd. You went with the family. You went with whoever your group is. You felt like that probably isn't right. You had that discernment. But you just, well, I guess it's going to be okay. I don't feel good about it. And then it hits. It hits. The majority laughed at Noah, and they drowned. The majority rebelled against Moses, and they died in the wilderness. The majority wanted a king instead of God. The majority stoned Stephen. They beat Paul, and the majority crucified Christ. Who are we following today? The majority or the one? Religious leaders in Jesus' day were condemned because, it says in John 12:43, they loved the praise of men more than the praise of God. Peter and the other apostles were commended because they said in Acts 5:29, we ought to obey God rather than men. Proverbs 29:25 says, the fear of man brings a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord shall be safe. So be a God pleaser, not a man pleaser. Hebrews 12:2-3 talks about fixing our eyes on Jesus. We've got so many things going on in our culture today that is telling us, you can see something that is black and white and they'll tell you it's blue. We can see daylight and they'll say it's nighttime. And you look at it and you think, that's not right. I can see it with my own eyes. But when they keep telling you over and over and over, are you just going to comply with what they're saying? At this time, when they were sailing in these days, they didn't have a compass. They navigated by the stars. Well, you know what? During this storm, there wasn't any stars out. It was cloudy. It was rainy. It was miserable. The pilot took a chance. At first, the winds and weather were favorable. Don't you know, he was just grinning and looking over his shoulder at Paul and thinking, you didn't know what you're talking about. But then the deadly storm arose. So, in the very last of this, verse 20, the terrible storm raged for many days, and I read where it was like 2 weeks, blotting out the sun and stars until at last all hope was gone. Where is your hope? They will see God's favor because Paul is with them. These people will learn spiritual truth. Just learning it is only half the battle. Will they be wise enough to implement the truth? Would we be wise enough to implement the truth that we learn? I told you I couldn't stand it. I gotta jump on over here. In verse 21, Paul said, men, you should have listened to me and not have set sail from Crete and incurred this injury or loss. So where's your hope? Romans 15:4 says, for everything that was written in the past was written to teach us, so that through endurance and encouragement of the scriptures, we might have hope. Today, whatever you're going through, you've got a storm of life that just all of a sudden happened. You weren't prepared for it. Everybody told you it was going to be okay. You're going to be fine. And then boom, this happened. Get into the Word. This is the only place that you're going to be able to seek God and comfort. Pray. Write in your grateful journal. What are your blessings for today? Go serve with somebody. Get your mind off of yourself. Get your mind fixed on Jesus. So seek a word of encouragement. Find encouragement in God's Word. Hold on to that one promise that you found. And you'll find that one promise each day that you read the Word. and then pray for a new day. It's all worth it whenever you get in and you read. Psalms 7, 1 through 17 is a great one. It tells us so many things that you could just get in and just read and just soak up. Verse 10 says, God is my shield, saving those whose hearts are true and right. He's an honest judge. We read yesterday that David didn't want him to judge him in his wrath. Judge me through your love. Verse 14, the wicked conceive evil, they were pregnant with trouble and give birth to lies. What lies are you believing today? Are you believing like the other people that we can travel, it's okay, it's not going to be any big deal? Or are you listening to the one that knows that this isn't a good thing? And finally, I want to jump into Proverbs 18:22. I'm going to write this down and go put it on the bathroom mirror on my husband's side so he can read this every day. It says, the man who finds a wife finds a treasure and he receives favor from God. I'm thinking, oh, this is here's my nugget today. I'm going to go grab Steve and I'm going to read him the Bible today. Well, and I'm sure that I'll be reading one for him to read to me real soon. Maybe it's about being humble. I'm not real sure. But anyway, thank you for joining us today. Look out for those storms. Look for somebody in your circle to talk to you and just pray, stay in the Word. It's all good and it's all worth it. I love you. And come back at noon for Tony to share with you today.